While I was having dinner at my son's house, my neighbor called me and asked in a trembling voice, "Are you home right now, Dominic?" "No," I replied, staring at my son across the table. "I am having dinner at Connor's penthouse." Pete whispered so quietly I could barely hear him. "Then who is in your house right now? Because I can see two men with crowbars in your living room." I looked up at my son, expecting him to be concerned. Instead, Connor laughed out loud. "I am Dominic Walsh, 72 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life designing the foundations of this city as an architect. I know how to calculate load-bearing walls and how to spot a hairline fracture before it brings a building down. But sitting there, at that glass table in my son's 44th floor penthouse, I realized I had missed the structural failure in my own bloodline. The evening began as a celebration. Connor had insisted on it. He sent a private car to pick me up, something he had never done before. He said he wanted to treat me to a Wagyu beef dinner to celebrate his company's new funding round. But from the moment I walked into that cold, modern apartment, the air felt thin, like all the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. My daughter-in-law, Natalie, sat to my right. She was 30 years old and beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, hard, sharp, and cold to the touch. She spent the first 20 minutes of the meal checking her reflection in her spoon and scrolling through her phone under the table. Connor sat at the head of the table, pouring a vintage Cabernet that cost more than my first car. He was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of the boy I used to take fishing on Lake Michigan. It was a practiced smile, the kind a shark gives before it takes a bite. The steak was tender, melting on my tongue, but as I swallowed, it tasted like ash. There was a nervous energy radiating off Connor. He kept tapping his foot against the leg of the table, a rhythmic, anxious thud that echoed in the silence. "Eat up, Dad," Connor said, refilling my glass before I had even finished the first serving. "You need your strength. It is a big night." I asked him what was so big about a Tuesday night, but he just winked at Natalie. She giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. That was when my phone buzzed against the polished mahogany of the table. I glanced at the screen. It was Pete. Pete was my neighbor of 20 years, a retired Marine who spent his days manicuring his lawn with military precision and his nights watching old westerns. Pete never called past 8 in the evening. He respected the unspoken rules of neighborly conduct. If Pete was calling at 9:30, something was wrong. I picked up the phone. "Excuse me," I muttered to the table. Connor's fork paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic shift in demeanor that my architect's eye caught immediately. "Hello, Pete," I said. "Is everything all right?" "Dominic," Pete's voice came through the line, tight and low. I could hear the wind whistling in the background, which meant he was outside, probably crouching behind his hedge. "Dominic, are you inside your house right now?" "No, Pete, I told you. I am at Connor's place downtown. We are having dinner." "Why?" There was a pause on the other end, heavy and terrifying. "Because the lights in your master bedroom just turned on," Pete whispered. "And I saw shadows. 2 of them. Big men. One of them is holding something that looks like a crowbar or a sledgehammer. They are tearing up your floorboards, Dominic." My blood ran cold. My house. The Victorian home on Oak Street where I had lived for 40 years. The house where I had raised Connor. The house where my late wife, Martha, had taken her last breath. It was my sanctuary, filled with a lifetime of blueprints, memories, and the smell of old paper and cedar wood. Someone was inside. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. "Connor," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "Call 911. Pete says there are intruders in my house." The reaction I expected was panic. I expected Connor to drop his fork, pull out his phone, and dial the police. I expected Natalie to gasp. I expected concern. Instead, the room went dead silent. Connor did not move. He slowly lowered his fork to the plate with a soft clink. He picked up his napkin and dabbed the corners of his mouth. He looked at Natalie, and then, slowly, he looked back at me. And he laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Sit down, Dad," Connor said. "Don't be dramatic." I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. "What did you say?" I asked, unable to comprehend the scene before me. "I said, sit down," Connor repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "There are no burglars. Well, not technically. They are contractors. I hired them." "You hired them?" I stammered. "To do what?" "To break into my house at night and tear up the floorboards. Pete says they have crowbars." Connor took a sip of wine, savoring it as if he had all the time in the world. "They are expediting the moving process, Dad. The buyer wants the property vacant and stripped by tomorrow morning. They plan to demolish it to build a new condo complex, so there is no point in being careful with the interior. We need to make sure there are no structural surprises before the excavators come in." The phone slipped from my fingers and landed on the thick carpet with a dull thud. I could still hear Pete's tinny voice shouting, "Dominic! Dominic, are you there? Should I go in with my shotgun?" But I couldn't answer him. The world was spinning. "Buyer?" I whispered. "I never sold my house, Connor. It is not for sale." "It will never be for sale." Natalie finally spoke up, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Oh, Dominic, don't be difficult. You signed the power of attorney 6 months ago when you had your eye surgery. Remember? We handled everything for you. It is a done deal. The wire transfer hit Connor's account this afternoon. $3 million. It is a lot of money, Dad. Enough to pay off, well, enough to help us out." I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had sat up with when he had fevers, the boy whose tuition I had paid for by working double shifts at the firm. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a stranger in a $3,000 suit. "You forged my signature," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "That power of attorney was for medical decisions only. If you used it to sell my house, that is fraud, Connor. That is a federal crime." Connor slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "It is survival, Dad." He stood up, towering over me. "You are sitting on a gold mine, rotting away in that old museum of a house, while my company is bleeding cash. Do you have any idea what the burn rate is for a tech startup in this city? I needed liquidity, and you need care." He gestured around the penthouse. "We have made arrangements. You are not going back to Oak Street. Tonight, you stay here. Tomorrow morning, a van from Sunrise Senior Living will pick you up." "It is a nice place, Dad." Natalie picked it out. Private room, bingo nights, round-the-clock supervision. "It is for your own good. You are getting forgetful. You are old. You can't live alone anymore." I looked at the door, the heavy, steel-reinforced door that led to the private elevator. I took a step toward it. "I am leaving," I said. "I am going home, and I am calling the police." Connor didn't chase me. He didn't even leave his chair. He just picked up a small remote control from the table and pressed a button. A beep echoed from the hallway. The smart lock engaged. The deadbolt slid home with a mechanical clack that sounded like a prison cell closing. I rushed to the door and pulled the handle. It wouldn't budge. I punched the keypad, but the screen remained black. "Let me out, Connor!" I shouted, pounding on the wood. "Open this door!" "Or what, Dad?" Connor called out from the dining room. "You will sue me?" "With what money? We liquidated your savings account yesterday, too. You have nothing. You are indigent. Without me, you are just a crazy old man shouting at a door. Now come back and finish your steak. It cost $200. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give out. I was 72 years old. I couldn't fight him physically. Connor was 35, fit, and fueled by the desperation of a man who owes money to dangerous people. If I stayed here tonight, I would never leave. By tomorrow, I would be sedated in a nursing home, and my house, my life's work, would be a pile of rubble. I needed to get out. Now. I turned around. Connor and Natalie were watching me, smug satisfaction painted on their faces. They thought they had won. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man. They forgot that I was an architect. They forgot that I knew how buildings breathed, how they functioned, and how they failed. I scanned the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, too thick to break, and a 40-story drop. The elevator required a key card. The service entrance in the kitchen would be locked too. Then my eyes landed on the ceiling. Sprinklers. Modern high-rises like this require sophisticated fire suppression systems, heat activated. And right next to the dining table stood Connor's pride and joy. A custom-built, glass-fronted wine cabinet stocked with high-proof spirits and expensive cognacs. It was positioned directly under a sprinkler head. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I straightened my jacket and turned back to them. I walked slowly toward the table. Connor smirked. "That is it, Dad. Be reasonable. Sit down. Have some wine." "I am not hungry," I said, my voice calm. I walked past my chair. I walked past Natalie. I walked straight to the wine cabinet. "What are you doing?" Connor asked, his brow furrowing. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the decorative fireplace set next to the wall. Before Connor could stand up, I swung the poker with every ounce of strength I had left in my old arms. Smash! The sound was explosive. The glass front of the cabinet shattered into a million diamonds. I didn't stop. I swung again, shattering bottles of whiskey, vodka, and brandy. The alcohol sprayed everywhere, soaking the carpet, soaking the walls. "Have you lost your mind?" Natalie screamed, jumping up and knocking over her chair. Connor lunged at me. "Stop him! He is crazy!" But I was already moving. I grabbed the linen napkin from the table, dipped it into the candle flame flickering in the centerpiece, and threw it into the alcohol-soaked wreckage of the cabinet. Whoosh! The fire didn't just start, it roared. The high-proof alcohol caught instantly, sending a tongue of blue and orange flame licking up toward the ceiling. The heat was intense and immediate. Connor screamed and scrambled back, shielding his face. Natalie shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. 3 seconds later, the building's safety systems took over. The smoke detector screamed. Then, with a sound like a cracking whip, the sprinkler head above us burst open. A torrent of gray, pressurized water blasted down, dousing the fire, but also flooding the room instantly. But that wasn't what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the fail-safe. In the event of a fire, all electronic locks in a residential high-rise are programmed to disengage automatically to allow for evacuation. It is a mandatory building code I helped write 30 years ago. Click. The sound of the front door unlocking was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "You crazy old lunatic!" Connor yelled, slipping on the wet floor as he tried to grab me. Water was pouring down on us like a monsoon. The pristine white furniture was ruined. The Wagyu beef was swimming in a mixture of expensive wine and sprinkler water. I didn't look back. I moved with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I shoved the heavy door open and stepped out into the hallway. The alarm was blaring throughout the entire building now, a deafening siren that masked the sound of my own ragged breathing. People were starting to emerge from other apartments, confused and frightened. I blended into the crowd of evacuees heading for the stairwell. I didn't take the elevator. They would shut down in a fire mode. I took the stairs. 44 flights. My knees screamed in protest. My chest burned. But every step down was a step away from the son who had sold me out. Every step was a declaration of war. By the time I burst out of the lobby doors and onto the cool, damp pavement of the city street, my legs were trembling uncontrollably. I hailed a yellow taxi that had slowed down to look at the commotion. The driver looked at me, a 72-year-old man in a soaked suit, gasping for air. "Where to, buddy?" he asked. I looked up at the penthouse balcony, where smoke was still drifting into the night sky. I imagined Connor up there, dealing with the water damage, the ruined, expensive rugs, and the police who would inevitably arrive. He thought he had taken my home. He thought he had stripped me of my dignity. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. "Take me to 42 Oak Street," I told the driver, my voice hard as granite. "And step on it. I have some rats to exterminate." As the taxi pulled away, I reached into my shoe. Underneath the orthopedic insole, I felt the hard plastic edge of my emergency burner phone. Connor had taken my smartphone. He had taken my wallet. He had drained my bank accounts. But he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten that he was playing chess with the man who built the board. I pulled out the tiny phone and dialed Pete's number. "Pete," I said when he answered, the sound of the siren fading behind me. "Dominic," Pete shouted, "where are you? The police are on their way to your place." "Good," I said. "Let them come. But Pete, do me a favor. Do you still have that old tranquilizer gun you used for stray dogs?" "Yeah?" Pete said, confused. "Why?" "Because," I said, watching the city lights blur past the window. "I am coming home. And I am not coming alone. I am bringing a storm with me. And Pete, if you see anyone trying to leave my house with a blue architect's tube, you shoot them. Do you understand me? You shoot to drop them." There was a pause, and then I heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun racking on the other end of the line. "Understood, Dominic," Pete said. "Welcome home." I snapped the phone shut. The taxi sped into the night, carrying me toward the ruins of my life. I had no money. I had no home. My son was a traitor. My daughter-in-law was a vulture. But as I watched the streetlights flicker by, I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. They wanted to treat me like a building to be demolished. They were about to find out that some foundations are built to withstand earthquakes, and when the dust settles, I would be the only one left standing. The taxi tires screeched against the wet asphalt of Oak Street, but the sound was drowned out by the cacophony of sirens. My neighborhood, usually a sanctuary of manicured lawns and hushed whispers, had been transformed into a chaotic theater of flashing red and blue lights. I threw a wad of damp cash at the driver and stumbled out of the car. My legs nearly gave way beneath me. The adrenaline that had carried me down 44 flights of stairs was fading, replaced by the bone-deep chill of the night air hitting my soaked suit. I stood there for a moment, gripping the door of the taxi, just breathing. My house loomed in front of me. The Victorian lady, as Martha used to call her. We had spent 10 years restoring her, stripping away layers of cheap paint to reveal the original cedar siding, sanding the banisters until they felt like silk. Now, police tape zigzagged across the front porch like a yellow scar. The front door, a solid piece of mahogany I had refinished with my own hands, stood wide open, gaping like a scream. Officer Miller, a young man I had known since he was a rookie patrolling the school zones, was trying to hold back a small crowd of neighbors. Among them was Pete, still wearing his bathrobe, clutching his shotgun with white-knuckled intensity, while another officer tried to talk him down. I pushed through the crowd, my shoes squelched with every step, a humiliating reminder of my escape. "Mr. Walsh," Officer Miller said, spotting me. He looked relieved but also confused. He took in my appearance, the dripping hair, the ruined suit, the wild look in my eyes. "Sir, are you all right? We got a call about a break-in, but the men inside claim they have a work order." I didn't answer him. I couldn't. The sound coming from inside my house was tearing me apart. It wasn't the sound of renovation. It was the sound of destruction. I pushed past the officer and walked up the front steps. The wood of the porch was familiar under my feet, but the vibration running through the structure was wrong. As an architect, I feel buildings. I feel their weight, their settlement, their groan. Tonight, my house was shuddering in pain. I stepped across the threshold and stopped dead. The foyer was a wreck. Muddy boot prints were stamped all over the Persian rug Martha had brought back from our honeymoon in Istanbul. But that was nothing compared to the living room. The furniture had been shoved carelessly into corners, piled up like garbage. The velvet armchair where I read my morning paper was overturned, its legs pointing helplessly at the ceiling. But my eyes were drawn to the center of the room. 2 men were there. They didn't look like contractors. They didn't wear tool belts or uniforms. They wore tight t-shirts that strained against gym-built muscles, and their arms were covered in ink. They were sweating, panting, and holding crowbars that looked heavy enough to kill a man. They had ripped up the floor. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged gasp that turned into a sob I refused to release. I had laid that floor myself, quarter-sawn white oak, arranged in a herringbone pattern that took me 3 weeks to perfect. I had selected each plank for its grain and color. I had driven every nail with precision. Now, jagged splinters of wood stuck up like broken ribs. The subfloor was exposed, a dark, gaping wound in the heart of my home. One of the men, the bald one with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, leaned on his crowbar and looked at me. He didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed. "Who is the wet rat?" he grunted, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty glove. Officer Miller stepped in behind me. "That is the homeowner," he said, his voice hardening. "And I suggest you put that tool down right now." The man shrugged and dropped the crowbar. It hit the exposed concrete slab with a metallic clang that echoed through the house. "We are just doing a job, officer," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "Oss said gut the floor. We are gutting the floor." "You are destroying my life," I whispered. I walked forward, my steps unsteady. I knelt down beside the wreckage. I touched a piece of the splintered oak. It was sharp, jagged. This wasn't demolition for a remodel. This was a search. They had torn up a specific section, right in the center of the room, and were digging into the dirt beneath the foundation. They weren't building anything. They were looking for something buried. "Get them out," I said, standing up. The rage that had been cold in the taxi was now turning into a hot, molten thing in my chest. "Get them out of my house, Miller. Arrest them." The second man, younger but with eyes that looked dead, smirked. "Arrest us for what, old man? We got a permit. We got a signed work order from the owner, Connor Walsh." He pointed to a clipboard lying on top of my overturned bookshelf. I looked at the clipboard. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. It was another lie, another forgery, another piece of paper my son had used to strip mine my existence. Officer Miller looked at the paperwork, then back at me. "Mr. Walsh," he said, his tone apologetic. "If your son authorized this, it is a civil matter. I can't arrest them for breaking and entering if they have a key and a contract." I turned on him. "Look at this," I shouted, sweeping my hand across the devastated room. "Does this look like a renovation to you? They are digging holes in the foundation. They are compromising the structural integrity of the load-bearing beams. I am a licensed architect, Miller. I am telling you, this is not construction. This is vandalism. This is desecration." The bald man laughed. He kicked a piece of my floorboard across the room. It hit the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. "Listen to Grandpa," he mocked. "He thinks he knows about structure. We're looking for pipes, Pops. Leaky pipes." I stared at him. I memorized his face. I memorized the scar on his chin, the shape of his ears, the snake on his neck. I filed it all away in the cold, analytical part of my brain, where I used to keep complex structural equations. "You are not looking for pipes," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "There are no pipes under this section of the living room. The main water line runs along the east wall. The sewage line runs to the north. Beneath this floor is nothing but compacted earth and concrete." The smile faded from the bald man's face. He exchanged a quick, nervous glance with his partner. "Get out," I repeated. Officer Miller sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He stepped between me and the thugs. "All right, that is enough," he said, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. "Work is over for tonight. I don't care what paperwork you have. You are disturbing the peace, and the homeowner is present and disputing your presence. Pack up your tools and leave. We will sort this out in the morning." The bald man spat on the floor. "On my floor." "Fine," he spat. "We need a beer anyway. Come on, Rigo." They gathered their crowbars and sledgehammers slowly, deliberately taking their time, trying to show they weren't intimidated. As the bald man passed me, he leaned in close. I could smell stale tobacco and old sweat. "Your son owes some bad people a lot of money, old man," he whispered, so low only I could hear. "We aren't done digging. And if we don't find the box, we might just start digging holes in you instead." He shoulder-checked me as he walked out the door. I stumbled back, catching myself on the doorframe. I watched them walk down the porch steps, past a fuming Pete, and climb into a black van with no license plates. Officer Miller sighed and holstered his thumb. "Sorry, Dominic," he said, using my first name for the first time. "I can write up a report, but until you get a court order stopping your son, my hands are tied. Technically, on paper, he has rights to the property." I looked around the ruin of my living room. My sanctuary was gone. The safety I had felt here for 40 years had evaporated, replaced by the cold draft blowing in through the open door. I felt a profound sense of violation, deeper than if they had just stolen a TV. They had invaded the only place where I could still feel Martha's presence. But as I looked at the hole in the floor, the despair began to harden into something else, something useful. They were looking for a box, a specific box, and they were digging in the living room because they thought that was where I kept my valuables. They were wrong. I didn't keep my most dangerous secrets in the living room. I walked over to the hole in the floor and stared into the dark earth. Connor thought he was smart. He thought he could bulldoze his way through my life. But he had made a fatal error. He had declared war on an architect in his own building. He had forgotten that I knew every secret passage, every hollow wall, and every hidden compartment in this house. I looked up at Officer Miller. "Thank you, officer," I said, my voice entirely steady now. "You can go. I will wait for my son." "You going to be okay here alone?" Miller asked, looking worried. "I am not alone," I said, glancing out the window where Pete was still standing guard on his lawn, shotgun cradled in his arm like a baby. "And besides, I have some cleaning up to do." As the police cruiser pulled away, I closed the front door. I locked it. Then I engaged the heavy brass deadbolt I had installed myself. I turned back to the silent, wounded house. "I am sorry, old girl," I whispered to the walls. "I am sorry I let them hurt you. But don't worry. We are going to fix this. And then we are going to bring the whole roof down on their heads." The silence in the living room did not last long. It was broken by the aggressive roar of an engine I recognized instantly. A sleek, silver Porsche Cayenne swerved into my driveway, its high-intensity LED headlights cutting through the gloom of my front yard like a scalpel. The car door slammed, and then came the rapid clicking of high heels and the heavy tread of expensive leather boots on the pavement. Connor burst through the front door, bringing a gust of rain and expensive cologne with him. Natalie trailed behind, holding a designer umbrella as if she were attending a gallery opening rather than a crime scene. Connor stopped in the middle of the foyer, his eyes scanning the destruction not with horror, but with a calculation that chilled my blood. Then, seeing Officer Miller standing by the staircase, his face transformed. The arrogance vanished, replaced instantly by the mask of a concerned, terrified son. "Dad!" Connor shouted, rushing toward me with his arms outstretched. "Thank God you are here. We were so worried when you ran out of the apartment. You were soaking wet. You were shaking." I took a step back, refusing to let him touch me. "Do not perform for the audience, Connor," I said, my voice low and steady. "The curtain has already fallen." Connor looked hurt, a practiced expression he had perfected since he was a teenager trying to get out of trouble. "Officer," he said, turning to Miller, his voice trembling with fake emotion, "my father is suffering from early-stage dementia. He's been having episodes of paranoia. We tried to keep him safe at my penthouse tonight, but he had an outburst and fled. We've been driving around looking for him for an hour." Officer Miller looked from Connor to me, his expression conflicted. He saw a well-dressed, articulate young man in a $3,000 suit showing concern for his disheveled, soaking wet father. The visual narrative was against me. "He is lying, Miller," I said, standing as tall as my 72-year-old spine would allow. "I do not have dementia. I have a son who is trying to steal my life." Connor sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with a heavy burden. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to the officer. "I knew he would say that. That is why I brought these. These are the medical evaluations from Dr. Evans and the power of attorney documents my father signed 6 months ago. They grant me full conservatorship over his estate and his medical decisions. I watched Miller open the envelope. I knew what he would find. A signature that looked exactly like mine, forged by a machine or a very talented criminal. A stamp from a notary who was likely on Connor's payroll. And a medical report detailing a decline in mental faculties that never happened. Miller read the papers under the beam of his flashlight. He flipped through page after page. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Finally, Miller looked up. He didn't look at me. He looked at Connor. "These papers appear to be in order, Mr. Walsh," Miller said. "No," I interrupted, stepping forward. "Look at the date, Miller. That date corresponds to the week I was in the hospital for cataract surgery. I was heavily medicated. Even if that signature is mine, which it is not, it was obtained under duress and influence. That makes it void. It makes it a matter for a judge, not a patrol officer," Connor said smoothly, cutting me off. "Officer, look at this house. Look at the floor. My father is tearing up his own home looking for things that don't exist. He is a danger to himself. That is why I hired the contractors to secure the property and why I arranged for him to be moved to a facility where he can be monitored." Miller turned to me. His face was sympathetic, but his eyes were hard. "The law is a binary system. It sees paper, not truth. Dominic," he said gently, "if your son has power of attorney and he authorized the work crews, then no crime has been committed here tonight. Technically, he has the legal right to manage the property." "But it is my home," I said, feeling the walls closing in. "I built this, and now you are destroying it," Connor said. "Officer, if you could please give us a moment. I need to speak to my father. I need to calm him down before we take him to the Sunrise facility." Miller hesitated, then nodded. "I will be right outside on the porch," he said, "just in case." As soon as Miller stepped out and the front door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The concerned son vanished. The shark returned. Connor walked over to the hole in the floorboards. He looked down at the exposed earth, then kicked a piece of splintered oak with his boot. "You are making this very difficult, Dad," Connor said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "And very expensive. Do you know how much it cost to get those guys here on short notice?" I walked over to my overturned armchair and righted it. I sat down, not because I wanted to, but because my knees were shaking. "Why, Connor?" I asked. "Why are you doing this? Is the company really doing that bad?" Connor laughed, a sharp, bitter bark. "Bad, Dad. The company is dead. It has been dead for 6 months. I borrowed money to keep it afloat. I borrowed from banks, then from friends, and then, when everyone stopped picking up my calls, I borrowed from people who don't sue you when you don't pay. They just break things. First your fingers, then your legs." He walked toward me, stopping just inches from my chair. He loomed over me, casting a long shadow across the ruined floor. "They gave me a deadline, Dad. Tomorrow. $5 million, or I disappear." I looked at him. I didn't see a monster. I saw a terrified child who had played with matches and burned down the forest. But his fear had made him dangerous. "So you sell my house," I said. "This house is worth $3 million. Where does the other $2 million come from?" Connor leaned down. He brought his face close to mine. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I could smell the stale wine on his breath. "The box, Dad," he whispered. The steel box you buried under the foundation 20 years ago. The one with the original blueprints for the Federal Reserve Vault. My heart stopped. I stared at him, keeping my face perfectly neutral, a skill I had learned in high-stakes boardroom negotiations. How did he know? I had never spoken of it. I saw you, Connor hissed. I was 15. I snuck down here to smoke a cigarette while you were pouring the new concrete in the basement. I saw you put the tube in a steel case and bury it before you laid the screed. I didn't know what it was then, but I remember you telling Mom that those prints were the only copy in existence, that they showed the blind spots in the sensors. He straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. I have a buyer for those prints, Dad. A very motivated buyer in the Eastern European market. They are willing to pay $2 million for the vulnerability you designed into that vault. You are delusional, I said quietly. That was 20 years ago. The bank has upgraded its security systems 3 times since then. No, they haven't, Connor smiled, and it was a cruel, triumphant thing. They upgraded the software. They never touched the physical structure. The ventilation shafts, the load-bearing weak points. They are all still there, and you know it. That is why you kept the prints, isn't it? An architect's ego. You wanted to keep the secret of your masterpiece. He leaned in again, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Tell me where it is. The guys dug up the living room because that is where the main beam is, but it wasn't there. Where is it, Dad? I looked at my son. He was willing to aid in a robbery of a federal bank. He was willing to sell his father's integrity to save his own skin. And he was willing to put me in a home to do it. I don't know what you are talking about, I said. I buried a time capsule. Pictures of you. Letters from your mother. There are no blueprints. Connor's face twisted in rage. He grabbed the arms of my chair, trapping me. Don't lie to me! I don't have time for your games. If I don't have that box by tomorrow noon, the people I owe money to, they are not just coming for me. They know you are my father. They know where you live. If I go down, Dad, I am taking you with me. Do you understand? They will come here, and they won't use crowbars on the floor. They will use them on you. I looked into his eyes. I saw the truth there. He wasn't bluffing about the danger. He was a drowning man trying to climb onto my shoulders to breathe, even if it meant drowning me. Natalie stepped forward from the shadows near the door. Her face was pale, her boredom replaced by anxiety. Connor, the police officer is looking through the window. Keep it down. Connor let go of the chair and stood up. He smoothed his jacket, taking a deep breath to compose himself. Fine, he said. Have it your way. He walked to the door and opened it. Officer Miller, he called out. We are ready. My father is confused, but he is willing to go. Miller stepped back inside. I looked at the officer. I looked at the gun on his hip. It represented the law, but in this moment, the law was a weapon being used against me. If I fought now, if I screamed about bank robberies and loan sharks, Connor would use it as proof of my dementia. See, he would say, he is hallucinating about heist movies. I would be sedated within the hour. I needed time. I needed space to maneuver. I stood up slowly. My joints popped. I brushed a speck of dust from my ruined suit. I am ready, I said to Miller. Connor looked surprised. He expected a fight. He expected me to beg. I will go to the Sunrise facility, I continued, keeping my eyes fixed on the wall, refusing to look at my son. I am tired. I want to sleep. Good, Connor said, exhaling a breath he had been holding. That is sensible, Dad." He thought he had won. He thought I was surrendering. He didn't understand that an architect never starts a demolition until the perimeter is secure. I needed to get out of this house so I could come back on my own terms. I needed to let him think the building was abandoned so he would stop guarding the exits. I walked past him. I didn't say goodbye to the house. I didn't look at the hole in the floor. I walked out onto the porch, into the rain. Pete was still there, watching from his lawn. I caught his eye. I gave a barely perceptible nod. Pete narrowed his eyes, shifted his grip on the shotgun, and nodded back. Connor and Natalie followed me to their car. I climbed into the back seat of the Porsche. The leather was soft, shielding me from the hard reality of the night. As we pulled away, leaving the police cruiser and my dark, violated home behind, Connor looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You made the right choice, Dad," he said. "You will see. It is better this way." I looked out the window at the blurring city lights. I touched the sole of my shoe, feeling the hard lump of the burner phone inside. It is not over, Connor, I thought. We are just laying the foundation. The car sped toward the nursing home, carrying a son who thought he was a king, and a father who was about to become an executioner. The legal system had failed me. The paperwork had trapped me. But Connor had forgotten one crucial thing about structural engineering. If you apply enough pressure to the right point, even the strongest steel will snap. And I knew exactly where his breaking point was. The interior of my son's Porsche smelled of fresh leather and anxiety. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving my battered home and the confused police officer behind in the rain, a heavy silence settled over us. I sat in the back seat, watching the back of Connor's head. He was checking his reflection in the rearview mirror every few seconds, his eyes darting back to see if I was angry, if I was sleeping, or if I was plotting. He saw nothing. I made sure of that. I kept my face as blank as a sheet of drafting paper before the first line is drawn. To the outside world, and certainly to my son, this looked like a surrender. The old man, wet and confused, had finally given up. He had accepted his fate. He was allowing himself to be carted off to a nursing home because he was too weak to fight. But that is the mistake amateurs make when they look at a building. They only see the facade. They don't see the steel reinforcement hidden behind the brick. I wasn't surrendering. I was executing a strategic retreat. If I had stayed on that porch, arguing with Officer Miller, screaming about conspiracies and buried blueprints, I would have been sedated within the hour. Connor would have used my anger as proof of my instability. He would have had me medicated into a stupor, and then I would have been truly helpless. By getting into this car voluntarily, I retained the one weapon Connor couldn't take from me, my clarity. "It is for the best, Dad," Connor said, breaking the silence as we merged onto the highway. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. He was trying to convince himself, not me. Sunrise Living is a top-tier facility. They have a great garden. You like gardening, right? And the staff is excellent. You won't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or maintaining that big old house. I didn't answer. I just watched the city lights blur past the rain-streaked window. The rhythm of the windshield wipers sounded like a countdown. Natalie, sitting in the passenger seat, didn't even turn around. She was furiously typing on her phone. I could see the reflection of the screen in the side window. She was looking up flight tickets. One way, Zurich. So that was the plan. Sell the house, sell the fake secrets, pay off the debt, and run before the ink was dry. They were sloppy. They were rushing. And people who rush make mistakes. We pulled up to the gates of Sunrise Senior Living 20 minutes later. It was a sprawling complex on the edge of the city, designed to look like a luxury resort, but feeling more like a minimum security prison for the unwanted. The architecture was bland and inoffensive, beige stucco and fake stone, designed to be forgettable. Connor parked the car under the portico. He turned off the engine and took a deep breath. "We are here," he said. I opened my door before he could come around to help me. I stepped out onto the concrete. The night air was still cold, but at least it was dry here. A night nurse was waiting for us by the sliding glass doors, holding a clipboard. She looked tired, but kind, the professional kindness of someone who deals with endings every day. "Mr. Walsh," she said, smiling at Connor. "We were expecting you." "This is my father, Dominic," Connor said, putting a hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, possessive. "He is a bit disoriented tonight. We had a situation at home. He needs rest. And we need to make sure he doesn't wander." I didn't shake his hand off. I let him play his role. I looked at the nurse. "I am tired," I said simply. "I would like to go to my room." The nurse nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Dominic. We have a lovely room prepared for you on the second floor. It overlooks the courtyard." Connor walked us to the reception desk to sign the admission papers. I watched him sign my life away. He scribbled his name with a flourish, handing over his credit card, which I knew was linked to the account he had stolen from me, to pay the deposit. He was buying his freedom with my money. "All right, Dad," Connor said, turning to me after the paperwork was done. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had just dropped a heavy bag of trash into a dumpster. "I will come visit you in a few days, once things settle down. Once we get the house sorted." I looked him in the eye. For a second, just a split second, I let the mask slip. I let him see the cold, hard calculation behind my gaze. "Don't worry about the house, Connor," I said softly. "It will be taken care of." He frowned, unsure of what I meant, but he was too eager to leave to ask. He patted my shoulder one last time. "Yeah, okay. Get some sleep, Dad." He turned and walked away. He walked fast. He grabbed Natalie's hand, and they practically ran back to the Porsche. They couldn't wait to get away from the guilt standing in the lobby. I watched through the glass doors as the taillights of the Porsche faded into the night. "Goodbye, Connor," I thought. "Enjoy your victory lap. It will be a short one." The nurse, whose name tag read Brenda, touched my arm gently. "Mr. Walsh, shall we go upstairs?" I followed her to the elevator. The facility was quiet. The smell of antiseptic and lavender air freshener hung heavy in the air. We walked down a long hallway lined with identical doors. Behind each one was a story, a life, probably abandoned just like mine. "Here we are," Brenda said, opening door 204. The room was small, clean, and completely devoid of personality. A single bed, a nightstand, a television mounted on the wall. It was a cell, but it was a comfortable one. "Do you need anything before I go?" Brenda asked. "A glass of water. A sedative to help you sleep." "No, thank you," I said. "I just need quiet." She nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. As soon as the latch clicked, I moved. The frailty vanished. I walked to the door and listened, footsteps fading away. Silence. I went to the window and looked out. The courtyard below was empty. Beyond the fence, the city glowed. I sat down on the edge of the bed and untied my left shoe. My hands were steady. I pulled out the orthopedic insole. Underneath lay the burner phone, small, black, and beautiful. It was my lifeline, my command center. Connor thought he had put me in storage. He thought he had bought himself time to find the box. But he didn't understand the concept of a Trojan horse. He hadn't trapped me in here. He had set me free from his supervision. I powered on the phone. The battery was at 80%. Plenty of juice for what I needed to do. I didn't call Pete yet, not immediately. First, I needed to assess the battlefield. I opened the browser on the tiny screen and logged into my encrypted cloud server. It was a system I used for my architectural firm, secure enough for government contracts. I navigated to the folder labeled Oak Street Renovation. But it wasn't renovation plans. It was the master access logs for the smart home system I had installed 3 years ago. Connor had locked me out of the app on my main phone, but he couldn't lock me out of the back-end server. I watched the screen. Motion detected, living room. Motion detected, master bedroom. They were back. Not Connor and Natalie, the other ones. The men with the crowbars. They had returned to finish the job. "Let them dig," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them destroy the floor. Let them tear down the drywall." I checked the time. It was 11 p.m. I had 12 hours before the bank opened. 12 hours before Connor's deadline. 12 hours to turn this nursing home room into a war room. I dialed a number from memory. It wasn't Pete. It was a number I hadn't called in 10 years. A woman named Whitman. The most ruthless estate attorney in the state, and the only person I trusted to handle a demolition of this magnitude. The phone rang 3 times before a sharp, awake voice answered. "Walsh?" she said. "It is past my bedtime. This better be good." "It is better than good, Whitman," I said, leaning back against the sterile pillows. "It is legendary. I need you to file an emergency injunction, and then I need you to help me fake a death. Not mine, my son's inheritance." I could hear the smile in her voice through the phone. "Start talking, Dominic. I am pouring a coffee." I closed my eyes, visualizing the blueprints of my revenge. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to erect the steel. Connor wanted a legacy. I was going to give him one he would never forget. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2 in the morning. The nursing home was silent, a heavy, medicated silence that felt more like a tomb than a place of rest. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the sheets untouched. I hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury for men who weren't watching their lives being dismantled brick by brick. I held the burner phone in my hand. It was warm, a small beacon of heat in the cold room. On the other end of the line, I could hear the rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. Whitman was working. She was the best estate attorney in Chicago, a woman who treated legal battles like blood sport. I had hired her 20 years ago, not because she was kind, but because she was terrifying. "So let me get this straight, Dominic." Whitman's voice came through the speaker, crisp and devoid of sleepiness despite the hour. "You are currently sitting in a room at Sunrise Senior Living, checking yourself in as a voluntary resident, while your son is orchestrating a fire sale of your entire existence." "That is correct," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I needed him to think I was contained, Whitman. I needed him to lower his guard. If I am in here, he stops looking over his shoulder. And if he stops looking over his shoulder, he gets sloppy." "He is already sloppy," Whitman scoffed. "I am looking at the county records right now. He didn't just forge your signature on the house deed.
He has been busy, Dominic. Very busy. I braced myself. I thought I was ready. I thought the house was the worst of it. I was wrong. Tell me, I said. Whitman paused. The typing stopped. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. It was softer, heavier. Dominic, she said.
He accessed your investment portfolio 3 days ago. The college funds for your grandkids. They are gone. Liquidated and transferred to an offshore shell company that I am guessing belongs to his creditors. I closed my eyes. The grandkids. Little Leo and Sarah. I had started those funds the day they were born. Every birthday check, every bonus from a big project, I had put it away for them. I wanted them to have choices. I wanted them to be free. Now, their future was sitting in the pocket of some loan shark because their father couldn't stop gambling with money that wasn't his. I felt a crack in my chest, a physical pain that radiated out to my fingertips. But I didn't cry. Crying was for victims. I wasn't a victim. I was an architect assessing damage. Is that all? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. There is one more thing, Whitman said. And Dominic, you need to sit down for this. I am already sitting, I said. Just say it. He sold the plot at Evergreen Cemetery, she whispered. The air left the room. Evergreen Cemetery. The plot next to Martha. When Martha died 5 years ago, I bought 2 plots side by side under the old oak tree she loved. We had picked them out together. I want to be near the roots, Dom, she had said, so I can help the tree grow. I had promised her that when my time came, I would be right there beside her. It was the only promise that mattered anymore. He sold it? I stammered, unable to comprehend the level of desecration. But he can't. That is hallowed ground, Whitman. That is my wife. That is my resting place. He listed it as unused real estate, Whitman explained, her voice tightening with professional rage. He found a loophole in the cemetery's resale policy. He sold the rights to the plot next to Martha to a stranger for $8,000. He sold your grave, Dominic. He sold your reunion with your wife for pocket change. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of a steel cable finally giving way under too much tension. The grief I had been holding back, the sadness, the confusion, it all vanished. In its place, a cold, dark void opened up. A void filled with absolute, crystalline clarity. He sold my grave, I repeated. The words tasted like iron. Dominic, Whitman said urgently, listen to me. We can fix this. I can file an injunction. I can sue for emotional distress. I can have him arrested for fraud before the sun comes up. No, I said. The word was flat, hard, and final. No arrests. Not yet. Whitman was silent for a moment. What do you mean, no? Dominic, he has stripped you bare. He has taken your home, your money, and now your grave. If we wait, he might disappear. He won't disappear, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I looked old. I looked tired. But behind the eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen since I was a young man fighting for my first contract. I saw a killer. He won't disappear because he hasn't found the box yet, I continued. He thinks the blueprint is his ticket out. He needs that $2 million to pay off the sharks. If you arrest him now, the police take him. He goes to jail for fraud. He gets 3 years, maybe 5 with good behavior. Then he comes out, writes a book about his troubled childhood, and moves on. I gripped the phone tighter. That is not enough, Whitman. Jail is too safe for him. He sold Martha's resting place. He didn't just steal from me, he tried to erase me. He tried to erase my past and my future. He declared me dead while I am still breathing. So what do you want to do? Whitman asked. I could hear the fear in her voice, but also the curiosity. I want to destroy him, I said calmly. I don't want to just beat him in court. I want to dismantle him. I want to let him think he has won. I want him to hold the prize in his hands. I want him to stand on the mountaintop, thinking he is the king of the world. And then, I want to be the one who pushes him off. I stood up and walked to the window. Down in the parking lot, a security guard was making his rounds, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Whitman, I said, do you still have the contacts at the Federal Reserve? The ones we worked with during the vault renovation 10 years ago? Yes, she said slowly. Why? And do you remember the life estate deed we drafted back then? I asked. The one that was never filed publicly? The one that says the property rights revert to the charitable trust immediately upon any attempt to sell or mortgage the land without my biometric consent. I have the original in my safe, Whitman said. Good, I said. Bring it. And bring the fake blueprints. The ones we drew up for the movie set consultation. The ones that look real but lead to a dead end. Dominic, Whitman warned. If you do what I think you are doing, you are putting yourself in the line of fire. These creditors of his, they are not businessmen. They are animals. If they find out the blueprints are fake, they won't find out, I cut her off. Not until it is too late. I looked at the moon hanging low in the sky. It was the same moon that shone on Martha's grave. The grave that was now alone. The grave that my son had sold to a stranger. I am done being a father, Whitman, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the grave he had sold. Tonight, I am just an architect, and I have a demolition to schedule. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Whitman spoke, her voice steely and resolved. I will meet you at the old service entrance of your house in 1 hour. I will bring the papers. I will bring the car. No car, I said. I have a ride. A ride? She asked. Who? I looked down at the courtyard, where a shadow was moving near the back gate. A shadow carrying a long, canvas-wrapped object that looked suspiciously like a shotgun. A neighbor, I said. A good neighbor. I hung up the phone. I put on my shoes. I tied the laces tight. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the door of my room and listened. The hallway was empty. I didn't look back at the bed. I didn't look back at the safety of the nursing home. I opened the door and stepped out into the shadows. Connor had made his move. He had taken everything. But he had forgotten the first rule of construction. You never, ever dig a hole if you don't know what is buried underneath. He wanted a fortune. I was going to give him a tragedy. I moved toward the fire exit, my steps silent on the linoleum floor. The hunt was on. The metal fire door of the nursing home clicked shut behind me, severing the tether to my safe, sterile prison. The night air was heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and impending violence. I pulled the collar of my jacket up against the chill, scanning the shadows of the service alley. A rusted Ford pickup truck idled 20 feet away, its engine rumbling with a low, throaty growl that sounded like a sleeping bear. The passenger door creaked open, and I climbed inside. The cab smelled of gun oil, old coffee, and peppermint. Pete sat behind the wheel, wearing a black beanie and a dark hunting jacket. Across his lap lay a 12-gauge shotgun, its barrel sawed down just enough to be legal, or perhaps just enough to be effective. "You look like hell, Dominic," Pete grunted, shifting the truck into gear. "I feel like a new man," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "Drive, and keep the lights off until we hit the main road." Pete didn't ask questions. He was a man who understood mission parameters. He navigated the truck out of the complex with the practiced ease of a man who had driven convoys through much worse terrain than a suburban nursing home parking lot. As we merged onto the highway, the city skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent to the fact that two old men were driving toward a war zone. We reached Oak Street 20 minutes later. Pete killed the engine 2 blocks away, coasting the heavy truck into the shadow of an overgrown oak tree. We sat there for a moment, listening to the silence of the neighborhood. It was deceptive. I knew that 300 yards away, my house was occupied by men who would break my legs as easily as they broke my furniture. "We go on foot from here," I whispered. Pete nodded, reaching for the door handle. He grabbed the shotgun. I put a hand on his arm. "No, Pete. Leave it." He looked at me as if I had asked him to walk naked into a blizzard. "Dominic, there are at least 3 of them. They are armed. If we walk in there with nothing but your architectural degree, we are dead." "We are not going in to fight," I said, my voice firm. "We are going in to retrieve. If you fire that weapon, the police come back. If the police come back, Connor wins. He plays the victim, claims I hired a hitman, and I spend the rest of my life in a cell while he sells the blueprints. We need to be ghosts, Pete. Can you be a ghost?" Pete stared at the shotgun, then back at me. He sighed, a heavy exhale through his nose. "I was a recon Marine, Dominic. I was a ghost before you were drawing stick figures." He tucked a large hunting knife into his belt and stepped out of the truck. I followed. We moved through the backyards of the neighbors, sticking to the shadows of the hedges. My knees protested with every crouch, every step over a wet flower bed, but I forced the pain into a small box in the back of my mind. We reached the perimeter of my property. Pete's house was dark, but mine was blazing with light. Every window was illuminated. They weren't hiding their presence. They were claiming their territory. We crouched behind the thick rhododendron bushes that lined the boundary between our lots. Through the leaves, I could see a black SUV parked in my driveway. A man was leaning against the hood, the cherry of his cigarette glowing bright red in the darkness. He was big, wearing a leather jacket, watching the street. "The front door is compromised," Pete whispered. "Back door will have a spotter too." "I know," I said. "We aren't using the doors." I signaled Pete to follow me. We belly-crawled through the wet grass, the mud seeping into my trousers, until we reached the foundation of the house on the east side. This was the blind spot. No windows overlooked this specific patch of garden. I brushed away a pile of dead leaves near the brickwork, revealing a small, rusted iron grate. "A coal chute," Pete whispered, realizing. "I haven't seen one of these in 50 years. I smiled in the dark. When I renovated the heating system in '95, I converted to gas. But I didn't seal the chute. I capped it from the inside with a pressure latch, just in case I ever needed to run new cabling, or in case I needed to break into my own house. I pulled a thin metal shim from my pocket, a tool I used for leveling drafting tables, and slid it between the grate and the brick. I felt the latch mechanism. I twisted. With a groan of protesting rust, the grate swung inward. It was a tight squeeze. For a moment, Panic flared in my chest. What if I was too old? What if I got stuck? But gravity was on my side. I slid feet first into the darkness, landing on a pile of old coal dust in the storage bin. Pete followed, landing with a soft thud beside me. We were in. The basement was cool and smelled of damp earth and laundry detergent. Above us, the floorboards, the ones I had laid with such care, creaked under heavy footsteps. I put a finger to my lips. We moved silently through the basement, navigating by memory. I knew where the water heater was. I knew where the support columns stood. We reached the section directly under the living room. Light filtered down through the cracks where the thugs had ripped up the floor earlier. Dust motes danced in the beams. I looked up and saw the soles of heavy boots walking back and forth. I could hear their voices clearly. The acoustics of the house, usually designed to carry the laughter of a dinner party, now amplified the threats of my enemies. "I am telling you, boss," a voice grumbled. "It is not here. We dug 3 feet down. There is nothing but dirt." "Keep digging," a deeper, colder voice replied. "Connor said the old man buried it under the living room." "Connor is a weasel, but he is not a liar about money." "He is not a liar," the first voice scoffed. "He is an idiot. Maybe the old man moved it. If he moved it, we will find out tomorrow. When the old man wakes up in the nursing home, we will pay him a visit. We will bring the pliers. Old people talk fast when they see the pliers." I felt Pete tense up beside me. His hand went to the knife at his belt. I grabbed his wrist and shook my head. Not yet. We needed to get upstairs. The document I needed, the life estate deed, wasn't buried in the dirt. Connor was right about one thing. I did bury a box 20 years ago, but he was wrong about what was inside. The real documents, the ones that could destroy him, were hidden in the one place Connor never looked because he never read a book in his life. The library. We moved toward the service staircase at the back of the basement. This was a narrow, steep flight of stairs originally designed for servants in the 1920s to move between the kitchen and the lower levels without being seen. I stepped on the first tread. It held. I stepped on the third. I skipped the fourth. The fourth step squeaked. I had meant to fix it for 10 years. Now, that laziness saved my life. I signaled Pete to skip it too. We reached the top of the stairs. The door opened into the butler's pantry, just off the kitchen. I cracked the door open an inch. The kitchen was brightly lit. A man was sitting at my kitchen island. He was eating an apple. My apple. He had his feet up on the granite countertop, a pistol resting casually next to the fruit bowl. We couldn't go through the kitchen. The library was down the hall, past the foyer where the boss was standing. I closed the door silently. We were trapped. Pete looked at me, his eyes asking the question, "What now, architect?" I closed my eyes and visualized the blueprints. The house was a living organism. It had veins and arteries, and like any body, it had hollow spaces. When I renovated the HVAC system, I had built a chase, a vertical shaft for the ductwork that ran from the basement up to the attic. It passed right behind the library wall. And I had installed an access panel in the pantry for maintenance. I pointed to the tall cabinet in the corner of the pantry, usually stocked with canned goods. Pete understood. We crept out of the stairwell and into the pantry. The man in the kitchen was 10 feet away, separated only by a swinging door. I could hear him crunching the apple. I opened the cabinet. I pushed aside the cans of tomato soup and beans. At the back of the cabinet was a plywood panel painted to match the interior. I found the hidden catch and popped it open. A draft of cold air hit my face. The space inside was tight, filled with silver ducts and cobwebs. But it was wide enough for a man. Just barely. I climbed in. The metal ductwork groaned softly under my weight. I froze. In the kitchen, the crunching stopped. "Did you hear that?" the man asked. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Pete squeezed in behind me and pulled the cabinet door shut, plunging us into total darkness. We heard the swinging door of the kitchen open. Heavy footsteps walked into the pantry. I could feel the vibration through the wall. The man was standing right on the other side of the cabinet. "Mice," the man muttered. "This place is a dump." He walked back to the kitchen. The swinging door swooshed shut. I exhaled, the sound loud in the confined space. I switched on the small penlight I carried in my pocket, shielding the beam with my fingers. We were inside the walls now. We shimmied sideways through the chase, stepping carefully on the framing studs. If we missed a stud, we would put a foot right through the drywall and into the hallway. 10 feet. 20 feet. I counted the studs. We were passing the dining room. Then the foyer. I could hear the boss talking on the phone. "Yeah, Connor. No, we haven't found it. You better pray we do. Because if I have to come down to that nursing home, I am going to peel you first, then your father." We reached the section of the wall that backed onto the library. This was it. I located the back of the built-in bookshelves. I knew this spot intimately. I had designed a false back on the third shelf from the bottom, specifically to hide the safe. But accessing it from behind was tricky. I had to remove the screws holding the rear panel without dropping them into the wall cavity. I took out my multi-tool. My hands, usually steady, were slick with sweat. One slip, one clatter of metal on metal, and we were dead. I turned the first screw. Silence. I turned the second. It resisted. I forced it, praying the wood wouldn't crack. It turned. I pushed the panel gently. It slid forward, creating a rectangular opening into the library. Light spilled into our hiding spot. The library was empty. The thugs hadn't touched this room yet. They were too obsessed with the floorboards. I squeezed through the opening, tumbling onto the Persian rug. Pete followed, landing with the grace of a cat. We were inside. I stood up and looked at the room. It smelled of old paper and leather, the smell of peace. I walked to the large oak desk. I didn't go for the wall safe. That was a decoy. I had put a few $1,000s and some jewelry in there to satisfy burglars. I went to the fireplace. The mantel was a solid piece of reclaimed timber. I reached underneath the heavy wood, feeling for the knot in the grain that wasn't actually a knot. I pressed it. A distinct click echoed in the silent room. A small drawer, seamlessly integrated into the side of the mantel, popped open. There it was, the life estate deed. The original document, stamped, notarized, and undeniable. And next to it, the flash drive, containing the biometric encryption keys for the trust. I grabbed them and shoved them into my inside pocket. "Got it," I whispered to Pete. Now, for part 2, the bait. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the rusted metal box I had prepared. Inside was a roll of blueprints I had drafted for a fictional bank heist movie 10 years ago. They looked incredibly complex, filled with red ink and stamps that said, "Top Secret." And nestled inside the roll was a USB drive loaded with the nastiest malware Whitman's tech guy could cook up. I walked over to the section of the floor near the window where the carpet was loose. I pulled it back. I pried up a loose floorboard, one I knew was loose because I kept meaning to nail it down. I dropped the box into the crawl space beneath and hammered the board back down with the heel of my shoe. Thud. Thud. It was loud. Too loud. From the hallway, a voice shouted, "Hey, who is in there?" Footsteps thundered toward the library door. "Go," I hissed to Pete. "Back in the wall." We scrambled back through the opening in the bookshelf. I pulled the false panel back into place just as the library door crashed open. Through the thin gap between the books, I saw the boss burst into the room, gun drawn. He scanned the empty room. He looked at the desk. He looked at the window. He walked over to the spot where I had just hammered the floorboard. He looked down. He saw the disturbance in the carpet. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Boys!" he yelled, his voice filled with triumph. "Bring the crowbars. I think the old man kept his treasure in the library." I leaned back against the stud in the dark wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Take the bait, I thought. Take it and choke on it. Pete tapped my shoulder and pointed up toward the attic access. We began the long, silent climb to the roof. We had what we came for, and we had left a bomb behind. The architect had just redesigned the playing field. The drawer slid open with a whisper of well-oiled bearings, revealing the contents I had hidden away a decade ago. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, trembled slightly as I reached for the manila envelope. This wasn't just paper. It was the nuclear option. I pulled out the life estate deed. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard legalese, dense paragraphs of text on heavy bond paper. But in the world of property law, this document was a ghost. It was a legal landmine I had buried deep within the county archives and my own personal safe, never to be triggered unless the unthinkable happened. Connor thought he had won because he held a power of attorney. He thought that gave him the right to sign my name and sell my assets. But he was playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. This deed stated clearly and irrevocably that while the property might eventually pass to my heirs, the absolute right of possession and control belonged to me until the moment my heart stopped beating. It meant that any sale, any transfer, any mortgage signed while I was still drawing breath was not just voidable, it was instantly illegal. It was the difference between being a tenant in your own home and being the king of the castle. As long as this paper existed, Connor wasn't selling a house. He was selling a bridge to nowhere. I slid the deed into the inside pocket of my jacket, right next to my heart. It felt heavy, like a shield. Now came the second part of the plan, the offensive strike. I reached into the deep pocket of my cargo pants and pulled out the rusted metal tube I had retrieved from the truck. It was battered and stained with oil, looking exactly like something an architect would bury and forget about. I popped the cap. Inside lay the blueprints I had drafted for a movie studio 12 years ago. They were beautiful fakes. I had used authentic blue ammonia paper, the kind that hasn't been manufactured since the late 90s. I had stamped them with red ink that read "Restricted Access" and "Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago." To a desperate criminal, these drawings looked like the keys to the kingdom. They showed ventilation shafts that didn't exist. They showed blind spots in the camera network that were pure fiction. But the real poison wasn't the paper. It was the small black USB drive taped to the inside of the tube. I had labeled the drive Security Override Protocols using an old label maker. It looked like a relic from the early digital age. But inside that drive was a modern nightmare. It was a rootkit virus that Whitman's forensic tech guy had cooked up. As soon as someone plugged this drive into a computer to read the files, it wouldn't just open a folder. It would silently copy every keystroke, every password, and every GPS coordinate of the device and send it directly to the server at the FBI Cybercrimes Division. If Connor's creditors were the sophisticated criminals I thought they were, they would plug this in immediately to verify the merchandise. And the moment they did, they would be tagging themselves for a federal raid. I walked over to the loose floorboard near the window. The thugs were tearing up the living room because that was the center of the house. It was the obvious place. But a man like me, a man who valued knowledge above all else, would hide his treasure in the library. I wedged the tip of my multi-tool into the gap between the oak planks. The wood groaned. It was a sound of protest, loud and sharp in the quiet room. I froze. From the hallway, the heavy footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" a voice growled. It came from the library. Panic flared in my chest, hot and bright. I didn't have time to be gentle. I yanked the board up, exposing the dark, dusty cavity between the joists. I dropped the metal tube into the hole. It landed with a dull clank on the plaster of the ceiling below. Perfect. I stomped the board back into place. I didn't have time to nail it down. I grabbed the edge of the Persian rug and kicked it back over the spot, leaving it slightly rumpled. It had to look like a hasty hiding spot. It had to look like a mistake. The doorknob of the library rattled. It was locked, but that wouldn't hold them for long. "Hey!" the voice shouted, closer now. "Open this door!" I signaled to Pete. He was already at the bookshelf, sliding the false panel open. I scrambled through the opening, my joints screaming in protest. I pulled my legs into the dark, dusty chase just as the library door shattered inward. I slid the panel shut, but I left a hairline crack. I needed to see. Through the sliver of light, I saw the boss enter. He was a mountain of a man, filling the doorway. He held a sledgehammer in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He swept the beam across the room. "Clear!" he yelled over his shoulder. But then his light caught the rug. The rug I had intentionally left disturbed. He walked over to it. He kicked the rug aside. He saw the loose board, the one sitting slightly higher than the rest because I hadn't nailed it down. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "Rigo!" he shouted, his voice thick with excitement. "Get in here. I think I found the honeypot." I watched as he jammed the claw of his hammer under the board and ripped it up. He reached into the hole. His hand came up clutching the rusted metal tube. He held it up to the light like a holy relic. He uncapped it. He pulled out the blueprints. He saw the red stamps. He saw the USB drive. "Bingo," he whispered. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He had taken the bait. He held his own destruction in his hands, and he was smiling about it. "Connor," the boss shouted into his phone. "We got it. We got the package." "Yeah, it was in the library, just like you said. Well, you said living room, but who cares? We got it." I leaned back against the rough wooden studs of the wall. Beside me, Pete gave me a thumbs up in the darkness. They had the fake blueprints. They had the tracker. And I had the deed. The balance of power had just shifted. Connor thought he was hours away from paying off his debt. In reality, he was hours away from walking into a federal trap. We moved silently through the wall cavity, heading up toward the attic access. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I wasn't just an old man running away anymore. I was the architect of their downfall. And tomorrow, at the charity gala, I was going to bring the whole structure crashing down on their heads. The grand ballroom of the city's historic hotel was a sea of black ties and diamond chokers. It was the kind of event where charity was just a polite word for networking, and where philanthropy was measured in tax write-offs rather than good deeds. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the 300 guests who sipped champagne and whispered about stock prices. In the center of it all stood my son, Connor. He looked every inch the prodigal success story. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his hair perfectly coiffed, a glass of vintage Krug in his hand. Beside him, Natalie glittered in a silver gown that clung to her like liquid mercury. They were laughing at a joke made by the mayor, throwing their heads back in a performance of happiness that was so convincing, it almost fooled me. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine level, looking down at them. I felt like a gargoyle perched on the edge of a cathedral, stone-faced and patient. To the casual observer, Connor was the picture of a devoted husband and a rising tech mogul. But I wasn't a casual observer. I was his father, and I could see the sweat glistening on his temples. I could see the way his eyes kept darting toward the back of the room, toward a table where 3 men in dark suits sat in silence. Those men were not donors. They were the creditors. The sharks. They were the ones who had bought the rusted metal tube from Connor this morning for $2 million. They were sitting there, drinking water, waiting for the verification process to complete. They thought they had just bought the blueprints to the Federal Reserve. They had no idea they had actually bought a one-way ticket to a federal prison cell. I adjusted my cufflinks. They were gold, a gift from Martha on our 25th anniversary. I hadn't worn a tuxedo in 10 years, not since her funeral. But tonight, I needed to look the part. I wasn't the confused old man in the wetsuit anymore. I was Dominic Walsh, the man who built half the skylines in this state. "Ready, Dominic?" a voice whispered beside me. I turned to see Whitman. She looked terrifyingly elegant in a black pantsuit, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Beside her stood Chief of Police Harrison, my old poker buddy. He wasn't in uniform. He was in formal wear, but the bulge of his service weapon was visible beneath his jacket to anyone who knew where to look. "I am ready," I said. We began our descent. The grand staircase curved down into the ballroom, a dramatic entrance designed for debutantes and royalty. As we walked down, the sound of our footsteps was swallowed by the murmur of the crowd, but our presence sent a ripple through the room. People started to notice. Heads turned. Whispers began to spread like a brush fire. "Isn't that Dominic Walsh? I thought he was ill. I heard Connor put him in a home yesterday. He looks fine to me. He looks angry." Connor was the last to notice. He was too busy charming a wealthy widow, likely trying to secure an investment for his next phantom project. It was Natalie who saw me first. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face so fast, her makeup stood out like a mask. She grabbed Connor's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Connor turned. He looked up at the staircase. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The music of the string quartet faded into the background. The clinking of glasses stopped. Connor stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the tuxedo. He looked at the calm, steady way I was descending the stairs. And then, he looked at the police chief walking one step behind me. Panic flickered in his eyes, raw and ugly. But Connor was a survivor. He swallowed hard, composed his face into a mask of delight, and started walking toward us. He was going to try to control the narrative. He was going to play the loving son one last time. "Dad!" Connor exclaimed, his voice booming across the silent room. "What a surprise! We thought you were resting. Is everything okay? Did you wander off again?" He was trying to paint me as the escapee, the senile old man who had slipped his leash. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I didn't smile. I didn't embrace him. I stood my ground, forcing him to stop 3 feet away. The distance between us was a chasm filled with lies and stolen money. "I am done resting, Connor," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the hush of the ballroom, it carried to every corner. And I didn't wander off. I checked out. Connor laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Well, that is great, Dad, but maybe this isn't the best place for you. This is a business event. It is loud. It is overwhelming. Why don't I get the driver to take you back to the penthouse? We can talk in the morning." He reached out to take my elbow, a gesture that looked supportive but was actually an attempt to steer me toward the exit. I pulled my arm away. The movement was sharp, violent in its restraint. "Don't touch me," I said. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath. The facade was cracking. Connor's smile faltered, his eyes narrowed. "Dad, don't make a scene," he hissed through his teeth, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "The buyers are watching. Do you want to ruin everything? Go home, or I swear to God, I will have you declared incompetent by sunrise." I looked over Connor's shoulder at the table in the back. The 3 men in dark suits were watching us intently. The leader, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, tapped his watch. He was impatient. He wanted to know why the old man was interrupting the celebration. I looked back at my son. I saw the fear behind his arrogance. He was terrified of them. He should have been terrified of me. "I am not here to make a scene, Connor," I said, raising my voice so the investors could hear me clearly. "I am here to make a donation." "A donation?" Connor blinked, confused. "Yes," I continued. "I heard you are auctioning off the future tonight. I wanted to see what price you put on a father's legacy." Natalie stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "Oh, Dominic, you are so funny. Please, everyone, grab a drink. My father-in-law is just—" "He loves the joke." She waved at the band to start playing, but the musicians didn't move. They were watching the drama unfold. I walked past Connor. I walked straight toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They sensed the power in my stride. They sensed that I wasn't a guest. I was the event. Connor scrambled to catch up with me. "Dad, what are you doing? Get off the stage. You are going to embarrass us." I climbed the steps to the podium. I stood in front of the microphone. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot. I gripped the sides of the lectern. It felt solid, like a drafting table. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my neighbors. I saw my former colleagues. I saw the elite of the city. And in the front row, looking up at me with a mixture of horror and fury, I saw my son and his wife. Behind them, near the exit, the 3 creditors stood up. They sensed something was wrong. They were reaching into their jackets, checking their phones. I took a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, steady and deep. My name is Dominic Walsh. I am Connor's father. And tonight, I have a story to tell you. It is a story about a house, a box, and a betrayal. Connor lunged for the stairs. "Dad, stop!" But Chief Harrison stepped in front of him, blocking his path with a broad, immovable chest. "Let him speak, Connor," Harrison said quietly. "It is a free country." Connor froze. He looked at the chief. He looked at the creditors. He realized, for the first time, that he had lost control of the room. I looked down at him. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. The prey was in the crosshairs, and now I was going to pull the trigger. The microphone screeched, a piercing feedback loop that cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. I didn't wince. I stood gripping the edges of the podium, my knuckles white, looking out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. The spotlight was hot on my face, blinding me to the specifics of the audience. But I didn't need to see them to feel their judgment. They were waiting for the old man to stammer. They were waiting for the senile architect to forget his own name. Connor was standing at the foot of the stage, his face a mask of frozen terror. Chief Harrison stood behind him, a silent sentinel, his arms crossed over his chest. The three creditors in the back had stopped checking their watches. They were staring at me, their eyes cold and calculating, wondering if the investment they had made that morning was about to evaporate. I leaned into the microphone. My voice, when it came out, was not the trembling whisper of a victim. It was the deep, resonant baritone that had once commanded construction sites and boardrooms. "Building a legacy is a lot like pouring concrete," I began, the words echoing off the high ceilings. "You mix the sand, the gravel, and the water. You build the forms. You lay the rebar, and then you wait. You hope that when it cures, it will be strong enough to hold up the sky. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, there is a flaw in the mixture. A bubble of air. A pocket of rot that you can't see from the surface." I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. My son, Connor, tells you that I am confused. He tells you that I am sick. He tells you that he is taking care of me out of love. And looking at him tonight, in his $5,000 suit, standing next to his beautiful wife, it is a convincing story. It is a beautiful facade. I looked directly at Connor. He was shaking his head slightly, mouthing the word, "Stop." But as an architect, I learned a long time ago that you cannot judge a building by its paint. You have to look at the structural integrity. You have to look at what happens in the dark, when the pressure is applied. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. It was connected wirelessly to the hotel's audio-visual system, a little trick Whitman had arranged with the AV technicians 10 minutes ago. I tapped the screen. Behind me, the massive projection screen that had been displaying the logo of Connor's failing tech company flickered. The logo vanished. The room darkened as the lights dimmed automatically for a video presentation. Connor lunged forward. "Cut the feed!" he screamed. "Cut it now!" But the tech booth was locked, and the technician was a man who owed Chief Harrison a favor. The video began to play. It wasn't a professional production. It was grainy black and white footage, taken from the hidden camera I had installed in the dining room chandelier 3 weeks ago. The date stamp in the corner read 2 days prior. On the screen, Connor and Natalie were sitting at the dinner table. They were drinking wine. They looked relaxed, comfortable. The audio was crisp and clear, amplified through the ballroom's concert-quality speakers. "I don't know how much longer we can wait, Connor." Natalie's voice rang out, shrill and impatient. "The interest payments are killing us. If the old man lives another 5 years, there will be nothing left for us to inherit. On screen, Connor swirled his wine glass. He looked bored. He is healthy as a horse, Nat. His heart is strong. That is the problem. He could live to be 90. Then we make sure he doesn't, Natalie said. She leaned in closer. Her face on the giant screen was twisted into a sneer that made the wealthy socialites in the ballroom gasp. The digoxin, Connor. The doctor said his dose is critical. If he misses it, his heart rhythm goes chaotic. But if he takes double, well, at his age, a heart attack is just nature taking its course. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't applause. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne glass. It shattered, but the sound was lost in the growing wave of murmurs. On the screen, Connor didn't slap her. He didn't tell her to stop. He just took a sip of wine. It is risky, the digital Connor said. Not if we cremate him immediately, Natalie replied. No autopsy. Just a grieving son and a quick funeral. We get the house. We get the insurance. We get the freedom. The video cut to black. I stood in the darkness for a second, letting the weight of their words settle over the room like a shroud. Then the house lights came back up, harsh and unforgiving. I looked down at my son. He wasn't standing anymore. He had collapsed onto his knees, not in prayer, but in the sheer physical weakness of a man whose soul has been exposed. Natalie was standing next to him, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide and darting around the room like a trapped animal. That, I said into the microphone, my voice breaking just a fraction, is the price of my legacy. That is the value my son placed on my life. Not love, not respect, just an obstacle to be removed, a biological problem to be solved with a skipped pill and a quick cremation. I walked around the podium and stood at the edge of the stage. You didn't just want my money, Connor, I said, looking down at him. You wanted my breath. You were willing to stop my heart to save your own skin. Connor looked up. His face was gray. Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. Dad, it was just talk. It was just... We were drunk. We didn't mean it. Liar, a voice shouted from the crowd. It was the mayor. Murderer, someone else yelled. Natalie grabbed Connor's shoulder. Tell them it is a deep fake, she hissed, her voice loud enough to be picked up by the microphone I was still holding. Tell them he used AI. Tell them he is crazy. I looked at Natalie. Even now, standing in the wreckage, she was trying to spin the narrative. It is not a fake, Natalie, I said. And neither is the police report Chief Harrison filed this morning based on that footage. Conspiracy to commit murder. The word hung in the air. Murder. At the back of the room, the three creditors stood up in unison. They didn't look shocked. They looked angry. They looked like men who had just realized they had bought a stolen car that was about to be impounded. The leader with the scar buttoned his jacket. He looked at Connor with a gaze that promised violence far worse than prison. Then he turned and walked out the exit, his men following him. Connor saw them leave. He saw his last hope of protection walking out the door. He tried to stand up, to run after them. Wait, he screamed. Wait, I have the money! I have the blueprints! But Chief Harrison put a heavy hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. You are not going anywhere, son, Harrison said. I looked out at the audience. The disgust on their faces was palpable. These were people who had shaken Connor's hand an hour ago. Now they looked at him as if he were a disease. I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. There was no joy in this victory. There was no thrill in seeing my son destroyed. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of justice. I had reinforced the foundation of the truth, but I had had to tear down the house to do it. I placed the microphone back on the stand. It clicked, a final sound in the silent room. "I am Dominic Walsh," I said to the crowd. "I am alive. And as long as I am breathing, this man will never touch a single cent of what I built." I turned my back on the audience. I turned my back on my son. And for the first time in 2 days, I didn't look over my shoulder. I walked off the stage, leaving Connor alone in the spotlight he had so desperately craved, burning under the heat of 1,000 staring eyes. The video screen faded to black, but the image of my son conspiring to end my life seemed to burn in the air like an afterimage. Connor remained on his knees, a ruined man in a ruined suit. Beside him, Natalie was sobbing, but it was a dry, ugly sound. The sound of someone mourning their bank account rather than their morality. The crowd was frozen. They were waiting for the police to drag him away. But the punishment was not over. We had stripped him of his reputation. Now, we had to strip him of his freedom. Martha Whitman stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with the rhythmic precision of a ticking clock. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at Connor. She opened her slim leather briefcase and placed a single stack of documents next to the microphone. I stepped back, giving her the floor. This was her arena. "My name is Martha Whitman," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a gavel. "I am Dominic Walsh's attorney, and while the video you just watched is evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder, it is actually the least of Connor Walsh's legal problems tonight." Connor looked up, his eyes bloodshot and confused. "What?" he croaked. "What are you talking about?" Whitman picked up the top document. She held it up to the light. "This morning, Connor Walsh executed the sale of the property at 42 Oak Street for $3 million, she began, addressing the room as if it were a jury box. He did this using a power of attorney document he claimed gave him control over his father's assets. He then used those funds to pay off illegal gambling debts. She paused, letting the words sink in. However, she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous register, there is a document that supersedes a power of attorney. It is called a life estate deed. Dominic Walsh signed this deed 10 years ago. It grants him absolute, irrevocable rights to the property until the moment of his natural death. She looked down at Connor. "You cannot sell what you do not own, Connor. By signing that sales contract, you committed title fraud. By accepting the wire transfer, you committed wire fraud. And by using the banking system to launder that stolen money into an offshore account, you committed money laundering." Connor scrambled to his feet. He looked desperate. He looked like a man trying to hold back the tide with his hands. "I didn't know," he stammered, looking at Chief Harrison. "I didn't know about the deed. It was a mistake. I can give the money back. I can reverse the wire." "You can't give it back," Whitman said coldly, "because you didn't steal from your father." She picked up the second document. This was the one that would bury him. 5 years ago, after the death of his wife, Dominic Walsh placed the ultimate ownership of his estate into a trust, she announced. The Walsh Family Charitable Trust. The beneficiary of this trust is not an individual. It is the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and the City Alliance for the Homeless. A gasp went through the room. "When you sold that house, Connor, Whitman said, pointing a finger at him like a loaded weapon. You didn't just steal from an old man. You stole $3 million from dying children and homeless families. That elevates your crime from a domestic dispute to a federal felony involving the defrauding of a charitable organization. The FBI doesn't look kindly on people who steal from cancer wards. Connor staggered back as if he had been punched. The guests in the ballroom, the wealthy elite who prided themselves on their philanthropy, looked at him with pure revulsion. To kill a father was a sin. To steal from a charity was social suicide. But I wasn't done. Whitman had fired the legal cannons. Now, it was time for me to detonate the bomb I had planted in the library. I walked back to the microphone. There is one more thing, I said. Connor looked at me. His eyes were wide with panic. He knew what was coming. He shook his head frantically. Dad, no, don't, please. I ignored him. I looked toward the back of the room, near the heavy velvet curtains of the exit. The three men in dark suits hadn't left yet. They were lingering, watching the scene unfold. The leader, the man with the scar, was staring at Connor with a look of intense calculation. My son has been very busy, I told the crowd. In addition to selling my home, he spent the last 24 hours tearing it apart. He was looking for something he believed I had buried under the floorboards 20 years ago. I paused. The room was silent. He believed he was looking for the security blueprints to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, I said. He believed I had stolen them during a renovation project. And this morning, he found a metal tube in my library containing what he thought were those blueprints. Connor's face turned the color of ash. He sold that tube to a group of private investors for $2 million, I continued. My eyes locked on the men at the back of the room. He told them it was a map to the vault. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt for the printing shop where I had made the fakes. I hate to disappoint the investors in the back of the room, I said, my voice dripping with irony. But the blueprints my son found were not for the bank vault. They were the preliminary schematics for the city's municipal sewage treatment plant, dated 1998. Laughter. Nervous, shocked laughter bubbled up from the crowd. You sold them a map of the toilets, Connor? I said. You charged dangerous men $2 million for a diagram of where the city flushes its waste. Connor looked at the men in the back. The leader with the scar was not laughing. His face had turned a shade of purple that matched the bruise on his ego. He took a step forward, his hand going into his jacket. But the trap had one final spring. And Connor, I added, raising my voice over the murmurs, you might want to tell your friends to check their phones. Because the USB drive you included with those blueprints, the one you said contained the security codes? I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. It contained a rootkit virus. As soon as they plugged it in to verify the files, it sent their GPS location and their IP address directly to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. At the back of the room, the leader's phone began to buzz. Then the phone of the man next to him. Then the third. It wasn't a call. It was an emergency alert. The leader pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. He looked at Connor with a hatred so pure it could have melted steel. He realized he had been played. He realized he had paid $2 million for sewage plans and had led the FBI right to his doorstep. He didn't draw a weapon. He knew it was too late. He looked at Connor, raised a single finger, and drew it slowly across his throat. A promise. A contract signed in the air. Then, The three men turned and fled through the service exit, hoping to outrun the signal. Connor saw the gesture. He understood what it meant. He was no longer just a fraudster. He was a dead man walking. The police would put him in prison, but the people he had ripped off would find him anywhere. He turned to Chief Harrison. He didn't run away. He ran toward the police officer. "Arrest me!" Connor screamed, grabbing Harrison's lapels. "Please, arrest me now! Take me into custody! You have to protect me! They're going to kill me!" Harrison looked down at Connor with a mixture of pity and disgust. He slowly unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked, a sound of finality. "Connor Walsh," Harrison said, his voice calm and professional. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny." He spun Connor around and slammed him against the edge of the stage. The crowd watched in silence as the golden boy of the tech world was cuffed, his face pressed against the wood. Natalie tried to inch away, trying to blend into the crowd. "And you, Mrs. Walsh," Harrison called out. "Don't go far. We have a warrant for you, too, as an accomplice." Two uniformed officers stepped out from the wings and took Natalie by the arms. She began to scream, blaming Connor, blaming me, blaming everyone but herself. I stood on the stage and watched them being dragged away. The flashbulbs of the society photographers were popping now, capturing the fall of the House of Walsh. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was a tragedy I had written, directed, and produced. Whitman closed her briefcase. She looked at me and nodded. It was done. I looked at the empty spot where Connor had stood. I felt a great weight lift off my shoulders. The termites were gone. The rot had been cut out. The foundation was damaged, yes, but it was still standing. The crowd began to applaud. It started with one person, then another, until the whole room was clapping. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for the show. They were clapping because they were glad it wasn't them. I didn't acknowledge the applause. I walked down the stairs, past the stunned mayor, past the shattered champagne glasses. I walked toward the exit. I had a house to rebuild, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where to start. The handcuffs made a sound that was final and absolute. It was the click of a steel door slamming shut on a lifetime of second chances. Connor wasn't fighting the police officers because he was brave. He was fighting them because he was a drowning man trying to climb up a waterfall. He was thrashing, kicking, and screaming, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail that stripped away every layer of his sophisticated veneer. "Dad!" Connor screamed, his face pressed against the rough carpet of the stage stairs as Chief Harrison hauled him up. "David, don't let them take me. You can't do this. They will kill me in there. The creditors know people on the inside. Dad, please. I am your son." I stood 5 feet away, my hands clasped behind my back. I watched the scene with a strange, detached clarity. I didn't see the man in the tuxedo. I saw the ghost of the little boy who used to scrape his knees running in the backyard. I saw the teenager who crashed his first car and cried in my arms. I saw the young man I had put through college. But those images were fading, overlaid by the face of the monster who had planned to stop my heart with a double dose of medication. I didn't step forward. I didn't offer to pay his bail. I didn't look at Chief Harrison to ask for leniency. Harrison hoisted Connor to his feet. My son's tuxedo was torn at the shoulder. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet, begging for the safety net I had provided for 35 years. "Help me," Connor whispered, the fight draining out of him. I looked him in the eye. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I felt a profound, hollow pity. It was the kind of pity you feel for a rabid dog that has to be put down, not because you hate the dog, but because you know it can never be saved. "I already helped you, Connor," I said softly, my voice barely carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "I stopped you from becoming a murderer. That is the last gift I will ever give you." Harrison signaled to his deputies. They gripped Connor by the arms and began the long walk toward the exit. The crowd of socialites, investors, and former friends parted like the Red Sea, recoiling from him as if his failure was contagious. Connor turned his head back one last time, his eyes locking onto mine, but I had already turned away. I looked at Natalie. She was standing near the edge of the stage, flanked by 2 female officers. She wasn't screaming. She was frozen in a state of shock. Her silver dress, which had shimmered so triumphantly an hour ago, now looked cheap and gaudy under the harsh house lights. She looked at the empty space where Connor had been, and then she looked at me. "Dominic," she stammered, tears cutting tracks through her heavy makeup. "Dominic, I didn't know. He forced me. I was scared. I can testify against him. I can help you." I looked at her. She was a beautiful, hollow shell. She had bet her youth and beauty on a man she thought was a winning ticket, and now she was holding a handful of ash. "You are not a victim, Natalie," I said, my voice cold and flat. "You are an accomplice. You were the one who suggested the cremation. I heard your voice." I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space for the first time. "My son was a weak man," I said, "but you were the one who handed him the knife." I nodded to the officers. They took her arms. She collapsed, her knees hitting the floor, sobbing about her reputation, about her life, about how unfair it all was. They dragged her out, her silver heels scraping uselessly against the floorboards. The room began to clear. The guests were leaving, eager to tweet about the scandal, eager to distance themselves from the wreckage. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom. The music had stopped. The champagne was warm. The party was over. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Whitman. She handed me a glass of water. "It is done, Dominic," she said quietly. "The demolition is complete." I took the water. My hand was steady. "Yes," I said, looking at the empty doorway where my family had just vanished. "The structure was rotten, Whitman. It had to come down." I took a sip of water. It tasted like rain. It tasted like a clean slate. "Let's go," I said. "I have a truck waiting outside. And I think Pete is getting impatient." I walked out of the hotel, leaving the ruins of my son's life behind me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left there to save. 3 days later, I stood on the porch of the house on Oak Street for the last time. The yellow police tape was gone. The broken window in the library had been repaired. To the outside world, the Victorian lady looked as majestic as she always had. But to me, she felt different. She felt like a beautiful shell that I had outgrown. I handed the heavy brass key to the director of the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. She took it with both hands, her eyes shining with gratitude. She told me that by next month, the bedrooms where Connor grew up would house families who were fighting for their children's lives. They would fill these rooms with hope, not greed. That was a legacy I could live with. I walked down the driveway, not to a luxury sedan, but to a 40-foot Winnebago parked at the curb. It was a beast of a vehicle, gleaming white and chrome, built for the long haul. Pete was already in the passenger seat. He had traded his shotgun for a road atlas and a fresh thermos of coffee. He rolled down the window as I approached. "The engine is purring, Dominic," Pete said, tapping the dashboard. "Where are we heading?" I climbed into the driver's seat. It sat high above the road, giving me a view of the horizon that I hadn't seen in years. I gripped the large steering wheel. It felt better than a drafting pencil. It felt better than a gavel. "West," I said, looking at the map spread out between us. "We are going to see the Grand Canyon, then the Redwoods, then, who knows, maybe we will drive until we run out of road." I put the vehicle in gear. The air brakes hissed, a sound of release. As we pulled away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see the house shrinking in the distance. I knew what I was leaving behind. I was leaving behind the betrayal, the pain, and the ghost of the son I had lost to his own ambition. For 72 years, I defined myself by what I built. I was an architect. I created structures meant to stand still, meant to endure, meant to protect. But I had learned the hardest lesson of all. A home isn't made of bricks and mortar. It isn't a location you can plot on a blueprint. And it certainly isn't a place where you have to sleep with one eye open. Home is peace. Home is the freedom to breathe without a weight on your chest. Home is knowing that the person sitting next to you would take a bullet for you, not put one in your back. I glanced over at Pete, who was already arguing with the radio station. I smiled. I spent a lifetime building walls. Now I am finally free to tear them down and see the world on the other side. The road stretched out before us, wide and open and full of promise. My name is Dominic Walsh. I am an architect without a house. But for the first time in my life, I am completely and truly home. Throughout my career, I believed that the strongest structures were made of steel and concrete. I was wrong. The only foundation that truly matters is loyalty. This journey taught me that shared blood does not guarantee a shared heart. Sometimes, the family you choose is far more important than the one you were born into. I learned that it is never too late to redesign your life, to demolish the toxic elements, and to rebuild on a foundation of self-respect. Peace is not a place you find. It is a structure you must build for yourself, brick by brick. Have you ever had to tear down a relationship to save your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if you believe that dignity is worth fighting for, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice. See you in the next one.